When we think about classic American food, most people imagine apple pie, hamburgers, fried chicken, or chocolate chip cookies. But America's culinary history contains a far stranger side. For generations, families across the United States created recipes that seemed perfectly normal at the time. They appeared in cookbooks, they were served at family dinners, they showed up at church gatherings and holiday celebrations, and people genuinely loved them. Today, however, many of these dishes seem almost unbelievable. Some sound like practical jokes, others appear to break every rule of modern cooking. Yet each one tells a fascinating story about the ingredients, trends, and traditions that shaped American kitchens throughout the 20th century. Tonight, we're exploring 5 strange American foods people once loved. Recipes that were once considered completely ordinary, but today leave many people asking the same question: who thought this was a good idea? And surprisingly often, the answer is almost everyone. Let's begin with a pie that somehow became famous despite containing one ingredient most people would consider absolutely essential: apples. Our first recipe may be one of the most famous examples of American kitchen ingenuity. A pie that looked like apple pie, tasted surprisingly similar to apple pie, and somehow managed to become popular without using a single apple. Few recipes surprise modern Americans more than mock apple pie. At first glance, it sounds impossible. How can you make apple pie without apples? Yet for more than a century, Americans have been doing exactly that. The story of mock apple pie is closely connected to one of the most important themes in American food history: adaptation. Throughout different periods of American history, families often faced shortages, economic hardship, or limited access to certain ingredients. Creative cooks learned how to work around those challenges, and sometimes their solutions became famous recipes in their own right. Mock apple pie became one of the most successful examples. The recipe gained widespread attention during the late 19th century and remained popular well into the 20th. Its secret ingredient was something few people would ever associate with pie: crackers. Usually buttery crackers similar to Ritz crackers. When combined with sugar, cinnamon, lemon juice, and baked inside a pastry crust, the crackers softened and developed a texture surprisingly similar to cooked apples. The resemblance shocked many first-time tasters. Some people genuinely believed they were eating traditional apple pie. The recipe became especially valuable during periods when fresh apples were unavailable or expensive. Families could still enjoy a familiar dessert using ingredients already sitting in the pantry. The smell itself felt familiar: cinnamon, sugar, butter, a golden pie baking in the oven. Everything suggested apple pie, except there were no apples. For many families, the recipe became more than a substitute. It became a tradition. Cookbooks featured it, home economists promoted it, and curious guests often reacted with disbelief when they learned what they had actually eaten. Mock apple pie also reflects a broader truth about American cooking. Many beloved recipes were born not from abundance but from necessity. People used creativity to solve problems, and occasionally those solutions became classics. Even today, the recipe continues to fascinate food historians and adventurous bakers. Not because it is the greatest pie ever made, but because it demonstrates just how inventive home cooks could be. To recreate traditional mock apple pie today, you would need buttery crackers, sugar, lemon juice, cinnamon, cream of tartar, water, and pie crust. First, cook the water, sugar, cream of tartar, and crackers until the crackers soften. Add lemon juice and cinnamon before transferring the mixture into a prepared pie crust. Cover with a second crust or lattice top. Bake until golden brown. Serve warm, often with vanilla ice cream. Strange, creative, unexpected. A uniquely American dessert that proved a convincing apple pie could exist without apples. And maybe that's why mock apple pie remains one of the most famous culinary illusions in American history. Because sometimes the most unusual recipes are the ones nobody sees coming. But while mock apple pie managed to imitate a familiar dessert, our next recipe took an ingredient normally found in a soup bowl and transformed it into a cake that became surprisingly popular across America. Few recipes sound more confusing than tomato soup cake. Even people who enjoy unusual foods often pause when they first hear the name. Tomato soup? In a cake? Surely there must be some mistake. But for much of the 20th century, tomato soup cake was a perfectly respectable American dessert. In fact, many families considered it a favorite. The origins of the recipe can be traced back to an era when convenience foods were transforming American kitchens. During the early and mid-20th century, canned goods became increasingly common. Manufacturers promoted creative new ways to use their products. Home cooks eagerly experimented with recipes that promised affordability, convenience, and dependable results. One of those ingredients was condensed tomato soup. At first glance, it seems completely unsuitable for dessert. Yet the soup contributed moisture, subtle sweetness, and acidity that worked surprisingly well in spice cakes. The result was far different from what most people imagined. The finished cake did not taste like a bowl of tomato soup. Instead, it tasted similar to a moist spice cake filled with warm flavors: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, sometimes raisins, sometimes walnuts. Many people who tasted it never guessed its secret ingredient. The recipe became particularly popular during periods of economic uncertainty. Ingredients needed to be affordable, waste needed to be minimized, and families often looked for ways to create satisfying desserts without expensive ingredients. Tomato soup cake offered exactly that. A single can of soup could help create a rich and flavorful cake using pantry staples already found in many homes. The smell became familiar in countless American kitchens. Spices warming in the oven, cake batter rising slowly, the aroma drifting through the house while children waited impatiently for dessert. For many families, the cake appeared during holidays, birthdays, and church gatherings. Recipe cards were copied and shared among neighbors. Community cookbooks included countless variations, and grandmothers often developed their own special versions. Like many unusual American recipes, tomato soup cake reflected a broader cultural trend. Americans have always been remarkably willing to experiment in the kitchen. Sometimes those experiments disappeared quickly. Other times, they became traditions. Tomato soup cake managed to survive for decades because it genuinely tasted good. Even today, people occasionally bake it out of curiosity, and many are surprised by how much they enjoy it. To recreate traditional tomato soup cake today, you would need condensed tomato soup, flour, sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, baking soda, raisins, optional. First, combine the dry ingredients and spices. Mix in the tomato soup, butter, and eggs until smooth. Fold in raisins if desired. Pour into a prepared cake pan and bake until fully cooked. Many versions are finished with cream cheese frosting. Serve with coffee or tea. Strange, unexpected, surprisingly delicious. A forgotten American dessert that proved unusual ingredients could sometimes create unforgettable results. And maybe that's why tomato soup cake continues to intrigue people today. Because every slice challenges our assumptions about what belongs in a dessert. But while tomato soup cake successfully hid its unusual ingredient, our next recipe made no effort to hide anything at all. In fact, it proudly combined two foods that most modern Americans would never think to place on the same plate. Few forgotten American recipes generate as much disbelief as ham and banana hollandaise. Unlike mock apple pie or tomato soup cake, which at least attempt to disguise their unusual ingredients, this dish tells you exactly what it contains: ham, bananas, hollandaise sauce, and somehow millions of Americans once considered it perfectly normal. The recipe became popular during the 1950s and 1960s, an era often remembered for some of the most creative and occasionally bizarre experiments in American cooking. Post-war optimism transformed the American kitchen. New appliances appeared, convenience foods became widely available, and homemakers were constantly encouraged to try innovative recipes. Magazines, advertisements, and cookbooks promoted dishes designed to feel modern, sophisticated, and exciting. During this period, unusual combinations became surprisingly fashionable. Fruit appeared in savory dishes. Gelatin molded entire meals into decorative shapes, and ingredients that seem strange today were often considered elegant. Ham and Banana Hollandaise emerged from that environment. The recipe was simple. Bananas were wrapped in slices of ham, placed into a baking dish, covered generously with rich hollandaise sauce, then baked until warm and golden. To modern audiences, the combination sounds almost impossible, yet many families genuinely enjoyed it. The sweetness of the banana contrasted with the saltiness of the ham. The creamy sauce brought everything together, and the final presentation looked impressive by mid-century standards. The dish also reflected changing attitudes toward entertaining guests. During the 1950s, presentation mattered. Hosts wanted meals that appeared sophisticated and memorable. Serving something unusual often became part of the experience. Guests were expected to be surprised and perhaps even impressed. The smell itself was distinctive. Warm ham, rich buttery sauce, sweet bananas softening in the oven, a combination few people encounter today. As culinary trends changed, however, recipes like ham and banana hollandaise gradually disappeared. American tastes shifted. Fresh ingredients became more important. Simple preparations gained popularity, and many mid-century creations were quietly left behind. Today, the recipe survives mostly in vintage cookbooks and collections of unusual American foods. Some people try it out of curiosity. Others prepare it as a nostalgic reminder of family meals from decades past. To recreate traditional ham and banana hollandaise today, you would need bananas, sliced ham, hollandaise sauce, butter. Wrap each banana in a slice of ham. Arrange them in a baking dish, covered generously with hollandaise sauce, then baked until heated through and lightly golden. Serve warm. Strange, bold, unforgettable, a uniquely American creation from an era when culinary experimentation knew very few limits. And maybe that's why Ham and Banana Hollandaise still fascinates people today, because it reminds us that every generation has foods future generations struggle to understand. But if ham wrapped around bananas sounds unusual, our next recipes somehow manage to make onions and peanut butter share the same plate. Few forgotten American recipes sound more unbelievable than peanut butter stuffed onions. Even among historians who study vintage recipes, this dish often produces a moment of disbelief. Peanut butter inside an onion? Surely that can't be real. And yet, during the early 20th century, recipes combining sweet, savory, and unexpected ingredients appeared throughout American cookbooks with surprising frequency. To understand peanut butter stuffed onions, it helps to remember that American cooking was once far more experimental than many people realize. Today, recipes tend to follow familiar patterns. Desserts are sweet, vegetables are savory. Certain ingredients simply don't belong together. But earlier generations often approached food differently. Home cooks constantly searched for new flavor combinations. Cookbooks encouraged creativity, and unusual recipes were frequently seen as signs of innovation rather than mistakes. Peanut butter itself was becoming increasingly popular throughout the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was affordable, nutritious, easy to store, and remarkably versatile. As a result, cooks began adding it to everything from sandwiches to soups and even vegetable dishes. The onion recipe emerged from that spirit of experimentation. Large, sweet onions were hollowed out and filled with seasoned peanut butter. Some versions added breadcrumbs, others included herbs or small amounts of butter. The onions were then baked until soft and tender. The result was far stranger in concept than in flavor. As the onions cooked, their sharpness mellowed considerably. Natural sugars developed. The peanut butter became warm, creamy, and rich. Together, the ingredients created a combination that many people described as surprisingly pleasant. Not everyone loved it. Even during its heyday, the recipe had critics, but enough people enjoyed it for the dish to appear repeatedly in newspapers, magazines, and community cookbooks. The recipe also reflected a period when Americans viewed food through a practical lens. Families often used whatever ingredients were available. Experimentation wasn't simply entertainment, it was a way of discovering new meals without spending extra money. For many home cooks, trying unusual recipes became part of everyday life. The smell itself must have been memorable. Sweet onions roasting slowly, peanut butter warming in the oven, a combination almost impossible to imagine in a modern kitchen. As decades passed, however, American tastes gradually shifted. Recipes became more standardized, certain flavor combinations disappeared, and peanut butter stuffed onions quietly faded into culinary history. Today, the dish survives mostly as a fascinating reminder of how adventurous American cooking once was. Some modern food historians recreate it out of curiosity. Others simply enjoy sharing the recipe because it sounds almost impossible to believe. To recreate traditional peanut butter stuffed onions today, you would need large sweet onions, peanut butter, breadcrumbs, butter, salt, and black pepper. First, peel and hollow out the onions. Combine peanut butter with breadcrumbs and seasonings. Fill each onion with the mixture. Top with a small amount of butter and bake until the onions become tender. Serve warm. Strange, unexpected, surprisingly edible. A forgotten American recipe from a time when culinary experimentation was part of everyday life. And maybe that's why peanut butter stuffed onions still fascinate people today, because they remind us that history is often much stranger than we imagine. But as unusual as peanut butter stuffed inside an onion may sound, our final recipe managed to create an entire pie from an ingredient most people would never expect to find in a dessert: vinegar. Few desserts better demonstrate American ingenuity than vinegar pie. At first glance, the recipe sounds completely absurd. Vinegar is something most people associate with salad dressing, pickles, and household cleaning, certainly not pie. Yet for generations, vinegar pie appeared on tables throughout rural America, and surprisingly, many people loved it. Its origins trace back to a time when fresh fruit was not always available. Long winters, remote communities, economic hardship, all created challenges for families trying to prepare desserts. When lemons were unavailable, vinegar could provide acidity. When fruit was scarce, creativity filled the gap. The result became known as vinegar pie. Often called one of America's desperation pies, the recipe belonged to a family of desserts created from pantry staples. These pies weren't designed to impress, they were designed to make do. Yet many eventually became beloved traditions. The filling was remarkably simple: sugar, butter, eggs, a small amount of vinegar, and a pie crust. When baked together, something unexpected happened. The vinegar lost its harsh character. Instead, it provided brightness and balance. Many people compared the finished flavor to lemon pie or custard pie. First-time tasters were often shocked to learn the secret ingredient. The pie became particularly important during difficult periods of American history. Families living through economic uncertainty learned to stretch ingredients as far as possible. Recipes like vinegar pie proved that satisfying desserts could emerge from even the most modest pantry. The smell itself was comforting: butter melting, sugar caramelizing slightly, pastry turning golden brown. Nothing about the aroma suggested vinegar, and that surprise became part of the recipe's enduring appeal. For many families, the pie represented resilience, the ability to create something enjoyable even when resources were limited, a lesson repeated throughout American culinary history. Today, vinegar pie has experienced a small revival among food historians and bakers interested in traditional recipes. Some prepare it out of curiosity. Others discover that they genuinely enjoy its delicate flavor. Either way, the recipe continues to challenge expectations. To recreate traditional vinegar pie today, you would need pie crust, eggs, sugar, butter, apple cider vinegar, vanilla extract. First, whisk together the eggs, sugar, melted butter, vinegar, and vanilla. Pour the mixture into a prepared pie crust. Bake until the filling is set and lightly golden. Allow the pie to cool before serving. Sweet, simple, unexpected. A forgotten American dessert that transformed one of the most unlikely ingredients imaginable into a beloved family favorite. And maybe that's why vinegar pie still fascinates people today, because it proves that some of history's strangest recipes were also some of its most ingenious. History is full of recipes that seem strange to modern eyes, yet every one of these dishes was once considered perfectly normal. Mock apple pie, tomato soup cake, ham and banana hollandaise, peanut butter stuffed onions, vinegar pie. Recipes emerged from necessity, creativity, curiosity, and changing tastes. Some were born during hard times. Others reflected culinary trends that have long since disappeared. Together, they remind us that food history is rarely predictable. Every generation develops recipes that seem completely reasonable in the moment, and every generation leaves behind dishes that future generations struggle to understand. Perhaps that is part of what makes food history so fascinating. It offers a glimpse into how people lived, adapted, and solved problems using whatever ingredients they had available, and sometimes those solutions became surprisingly delicious. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of America's strangest forgotten foods. And until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep exploring the stories hidden inside the foods of the past.